I thought love sounded like favorite songs and whispered promises, until a quiet afternoon in a neighborhood cafe introduced me to Eli. I didn't know he was deaf. I only knew his smile felt like sunlight after rain. When his hands began to speak, my life listened for the first time. This is how a gentleman, patient as morning, taught me to hear with my eyes, to answer with my hands, and to truly be seen. By him completely. If this story moves you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps more hearts learn love in ASL today. I keep coming back to that first moment because life didn't announce its change with trumpets or fireworks. It came softly, like steam rising from a cup, like paint drying in afternoon light. I was at the corner table, same as always, my book half open and my phone buzzing under my palm. The cafe was filled with the usual sounds, milk hissing, spoons clinking, two college kids debating something about history. The bell over the door chimed, and a breeze carried in the smell of rain and street dust. Then he walked in. He had that calm way of moving, like he'd made peace with his own height and didn't need to apologize for it. Dark curls, a well-worn denim jacket, a small scar at his chin that you didn't notice until he smiled, and then you noticed nothing else. He glanced around, took in the room with quick eyes, and stepped up to the counter. The barista said something cheerful. He nodded, pointed to the pastry case, and then to a drink on the menu. The barista leaned in and spoke a little louder. He nodded again. It looked ordinary. The only not ordinary thing that got my attention was the quiet. No banter, no how's it going? No chuckle when the card reader had a moment and asked for a second swipe. He waited, patient, polite. He took his iced coffee and a cinnamon roll, and he turned. That was the first time we caught each other's eyes. I was mid-sip, and somehow the straw missed, and I got coffee on the side of my face because, yes, I was 37 and still capable of being 15 around a pretty man. He smiled. I smiled, pretending to not be melting into my chair. He made his way to the table beside mine, close enough that I could smell a clean, warm fragrance. Maybe laundry soap, maybe something woodsy. He put his phone on the table but didn't pick it up. He set the cinnamon roll down like it was a gift. He took a napkin and carefully split the roll, then glanced toward the counter for a small plate. The plates were behind the bar where the staff would hand them out. He looked back at me, lifted his eyebrows. I got up because it was an excuse to do something. "Hey," I said, "do you want me to grab a plate?" He looked at me, eyes kind, face attentive. I repeated a bit louder, "Plate?" and mimed a circle. He smiled again and nodded. That was the first hint, but it didn't register. I brought 2 plates. Because his cinnamon roll had split so cleanly, it seemed like it wanted a companion. I set one on his table, and impulsively I said, "I'm Aaron. If you want half, I'll trade you a story." It was something my grandmother used to say. She traded recipes for stories, friendship for extra slices of pie. He looked at my mouth carefully. Then he reached for a pen from his pocket. He tore the corner off a paper bag and wrote, "Hi, Aaron. I am Eli. Thank you. Keep yours." He slid it across. The handwriting was neat and firm. I felt a little jolt, like when you realize you've missed something important but aren't sure what it is yet. "Hi, Eli," I said gently and slower, not louder. He watched me, then nodded with that same small, attentive smile. He wrote again, "I am deaf. It is okay to talk." I read some. He tapped his eyes and then pointed to my mouth, showing me what he meant. Read some. My heart did a complicated thing. Part of it felt humbly embarrassed for saying plate too loud earlier, for assuming that my way was the only way. Another part felt curious and relieved. This was explainable and human and right here. I nodded and said, slowly, "Thank you for telling me." And I tried not to be ridiculous about enunciating, but I probably was. He reached, tapped his chest twice, then moved his hand forward with a small smile. "Thank you," in sign. It was beautiful, simple, like a breath made visible. We shared the quiet that followed, comfortable as a sweater. I finally said, with a bit of courage that showed up only because he was so calm, "Would it be okay if I sit with you?" He tilted his head, a question mark with eyebrows. I pointed to my chair, then to his table, and made a hopeful expression. He only needed a second before he nodded and motioned with his hand, a little sweep. "Please join." I pulled my chair over. We made a gentle pact to communicate with what we had. He wrote, I wrote. I spoke slowly. He read when he felt like it. He taught me with his hands and his patience. At one point, he showed me how to spell his name by fingerspelling, E-L-I, quick and smooth, like a rhythm he could make in his sleep. He took my hand and guided my fingers gently into the shapes for A-A-R-O-N, tapping my knuckles to correct me with kindness. The whole time I was thinking about all the things we miss when we think communication is just noise from lips. Here was language in wrists and palms, meaning in a tilt of a chin. When he left, he wrote his number on my napkin, then added, text is best, or FaceTime. Voicemail I will not hear. He drew a tiny smiley face that looked almost like it was winking. I stood there in the doorway after he walked into the rain, holding that napkin like a plane ticket to a place I couldn't even pronounce yet. I went home and did what anyone does at the beginning of a crush and a lesson. I researched. I looked up basic ASL greetings. I watched a video where a cheerful woman in a blue shirt signed, "Nice to meet you," and explained eyebrows. I practiced in the reflection of my bedroom window. I realized quickly that this wasn't just new vocabulary. This was stepping into a new culture, a different way of saying, I am here with you. Friends who knew me laughed kindly when I called to tell them, "You're really doing this, aren't you?" And I said yes, like you say yes when a door opens onto sunlight. We texted that evening. I typed, "Today was good. Thank you for teaching me your name." He replied almost immediately, "You learned fast. Your hands are careful. Want to get coffee again Thursday?" He signed coffee in a short video clip, both hands grinding an imaginary coffee grinder, smiling into the camera. I must have watched that 10 times. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I walked in with my phone brightness up, because that's what the internet suggested for deaf-friendly communication in low light. I smiled and waved slightly, remembering that getting someone's attention is a real thing and not rude at all. He waved back, wider. I got to the counter and the barista asked, "Same for you?" And I had this moment of loving the normalcy of it, because normal is where love lives, not in the fancy places. I ordered, then took a deep breath and turned to him. He was seated, waiting, eyes soft. I signed, a little clumsy, "Nice to meet you," and mouthed it while I did it. He clapped silently, delighted, then reached to correct the angle of my wrist, moving it just a hair. He was close enough that I noticed his freckles for the first time, a span of night sky across the ridge of his nose. We found a rhythm quickly. I would say a sentence, then tap lightly on the table when I finished. He'd look, read, and respond with signs and notes and expressive eyebrows that said so much I started wondering how much I'd missed my whole life from not watching faces closely. He told me about his job, graphic designer, freelance, with clients who appreciated emails more than phone calls. He told me he liked to run early in the morning when the city felt like it was making itself ready for the day. He has a sister, Talia, who teaches second grade and texts him pictures of glitter disasters. He was raised signing at home. His parents learned with him after the diagnosis when he was 2. They fought for interpreters, for captions, for doors to open. You could see the fight in the straightness of his shoulders and the softness in his eyes when he looked at me. Like he'd seen enough battles to know when peace had entered the room. I said less about me at first. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because listening felt like the right thing and also the new thing. I told him about my mom, who taught me to stir stew slowly and steady, and my dad, who fixed clocks for a living, and maybe that's where I got my love of timing and patience. I told him about my job with the city parks department, scheduling volunteers and getting muddy at neighborhood cleanups. I told him I was one of those people who learned the names of baristas and cashiers, that daily kindness was my favorite sport. He signed the word for community, 2 hands forming something like a shared bowl, and held my gaze. Some moments imprint themselves right then, an instant Polaroid developing before your eyes. That was one. We started seeing each other often. Thursdays turned to Saturdays, and then, quietly, Wednesdays too. Eli took me to a neighborhood farmer's market where a band played under strings of lights. You could feel the beat thumping through the wooden boards of the sidewalk. He grinned and tapped the rhythm into my shoulder, a pattern that said, "This is here, with us." He bought a bundle of sunflowers and handed one to me, and I still have the dried petals pressed in a book. He taught me how to sign home by bringing his fingertips together and moving them against his cheek like a little roof where your face rests safe. When he signed it, he glanced at me, then away. I tucked that away like a secret note for later. I enrolled in an ASL class at the community center because the feeling of wanting to say more had grown bigger than the fear of looking foolish. I was by far the oldest student. The teacher, a woman named Ms. Park, had gracious eyes and a sense of humor that saved many of us from drowning in syntax. The first night, she told us to turn our chairs in a circle and put our phones face down. Your phone will be there after. Your eyes are here now, she signed. I liked the way that felt, like a reset to a busy mind. We learned the alphabet again, and this time I didn't just memorize shapes. I learned the patience of waiting for someone to finish fingerspelling, that relaxation is part of listening. I was terrible at first. Everyone is. Your hands forget they are brave. But we were encouraged to try, to make mistakes boldly and then move on. I signed "I'm sorry" to my classmates at least a dozen times that evening because my fingers turned into noodles when it was my turn. Ms. Park signed "slow," "brave," "steady," then pointed to her eyes. And I swear it was advice for the rest of my life. After class, I sat in my car and texted Eli a small video of me signing "learn," bringing my hand from the book, my other hand, to my forehead. He replied with a video signing "proud." His smile warmed my whole dashboard. The first time I met his friends, I worried like anyone meeting the people who formed his world. We went to a deaf night at a bowling alley. The place was bright, lanes gleaming under blue-lit numbers, arcade games chiming. It was the kind of loud where conversations dissolve into the walls anyway, where what matters is the look on your friend's face when they knock all the pins down. Eli waved us toward a cluster of people laughing silently with their heads tipped back. They greeted us with emphatic hellos, big smiles, and a cascade of hands moving in friendly storms. Introductions were fast and warm. I fingerspelled my name and got a little cheer. One person tapped my forearm to get my attention, and at first I flinched, then realized this was how you said, "I'm here with you," in a place without shouting from across a lane. It was also human, so kind. Bowling with deaf friends meant cheering with our bodies, meeting eyes to share the victory. It meant learning not to block someone's line of sight. It meant tapping gently instead of calling out. I learned a new favorite sign that night. Gorgeous, because someone's baby showed up in a tiny sweater and the whole group took turns making the sign and cooing silently. I watched Eli in this world and saw a layer that I didn't see at the cafe, how fluent he was in the space without sound, how he moved like this was his hometown. He signed fast with his friends and then slowed down to include me, not in a patronizing way, but like you slow down your steps for a companion crossing a stream on the stones. We bowled badly and laughed well. At the snack bar, I stood in line and a man behind me tapped twice, then signed a question about whether I was hearing. I signed, "Yes, I am learning." He grinned and signed slow for me. "Nice. Keep trying." He told me his name by drawing the shape of a crooked letter on his chest. Name signs, which I was learning are given with love, not asked for. Later, Eli would give me one quietly in his kitchen while we waited for rice to boil. He brushed the pad of his thumb over a small scar on my wrist I got from a bike accident when I was little, then marked the air there with a gentle stroke like a tiny comet. It felt like he'd seen me as a map and sketched in a legend. At home, I started making my space friendlier. I bought a doorbell that flashed lights and vibrated my phone. I set up captions on every streaming service and smiled at how they no longer bothered me by cutting off the bottom of the picture. They were doorways to understanding. I practiced tapping surfaces before walking into rooms so I wouldn't startle him. Little things. They weren't about making my home okay for a deaf person, because he didn't need to be accommodated like luggage. They were about making our world together easier, attentively generous. Loving someone is 100,000 small acts, mostly witnessed by no one. The first argument we ever had caught us both off guard. It was about something ridiculous. What to do for the long weekend. I wanted to drive to the lake and sit on a dock and let the water decide the schedule. He wanted to stay in, cook, and watch a marathon of a show with an interpreter he liked, who did live interpretations sometimes at a local theater. It wasn't the plans that were the problem. It was what they represented. I thought the lake would be relaxing. He thought the house would be easier, less explaining to do out in the world. Neither of us said it that way at first because humans don't know they're talking about feelings until they run into them. He signed fast and sharp, something I didn't catch. I asked him to repeat slower. He sighed, dropped his hands, and typed on his phone. Sometimes I want not to work to be understood. I read it, and my face burned hot with shame that wasn't about guilt, but about recognizing a job I hadn't yet noticed. He wasn't wrong. Even with me trying, the world asks him to do extra all day long, and love should be a place where that load gets lighter, not heavier. I typed, "I hear you. I am sorry. I want home to be easy for you." He nodded, the crease between his eyebrows easing. Then he signed, "Thank you," and "understand," in a way that felt like a stitch made tight. We compromised, like people do when they reframe the conversation correctly. Saturday was his day. Sunday, we drove to the lake, and I watched him sit on the dock with his eyes closed like the sun was a song he could feel without anything else added. I squeezed his hand and he squeezed back, and that squeeze said everything we hadn't yet learned to sign. The first time I told him I loved him, my hands shook. We were in my kitchen, a Thursday with spaghetti that wanted more salt and bread that came out of the oven with a perfectly cracked crust. We danced a little to the beat of the timer because talking wasn't the only way to enjoy music. He was leaning against the counter, watching me with a fondness that made my breath do that hiccup thing. I stood in front of him and signed "I" by pointing to my chest, then "love," crossing my arms around myself, hands open on my shoulders, and then "you," pointing to him. It felt so simple and huge. My eyes stung. He looked at my hands, then my face, and smiled with a softness that would probably have collapsed any defense I had left. He signed it back, "I love you," slow and clear, and then he reached out and tapped his fingers gently against mine like punctuation. We lived in the same building for months before we moved in together. His apartment had art everywhere, prints he made and photographs taken by friends, hands at the center of many. He had plants thriving under a big window, including one that looked like it could audition for a jungle movie and be convincing. Mine was tidy, lined up books and tools in the right place so I could fix a drawer right away or hang a picture with a level in 5 seconds. We spent that year blending our households and learning that love in your 30s comes with a grace for histories. We didn't try to make ourselves 18 again. We were two men with favorite mugs and old losses and chosen hope. Meeting family and friends is always a milestone. My mom called me the evening before and said, "Tell me how to be considerate." I nearly cried at the care in that sentence. I told her about turning toward him when speaking, about not saying "never mind" if he didn't catch something, about how patience is a gift, not a favor. She learned to sign "welcome," "home," and "I love you" with her crocheting hands. When she met him, she said "welcome," with her palms dancing and her eyes shining, and then hugged him and patted his back like she'd known him since he was a boy. He was a little shy about it at first, and then let himself be loved. My dad asked questions the way quiet men do, with interest hidden behind dry humor. By dessert, they were trading bad puns written on napkins across the table. His family was like a warm front blowing in. Talia arrived with a big tote bag overflowing with snacks and craft supplies because she always did. She signed fast, then slowed down for me, then laughed when Eli teased her to let me catch up. Their parents arrived later with a casserole that tasted like childhood and Friday nights and homework at the table. We sat in their living room under a framed photo of baby Eli in a blue onesie, gazing into the camera with that same steady look. They told me the story of learning ASL along with him. They said we made mistakes. We are still learning. They said love always has a translation. I went home with a plastic container of leftovers and a heart that felt held. We made our world. It was not just doorbells and captions. It was the way he touched my forearm gently as he passed behind me so I knew he was near. It was me remembering not to talk to him from another room, but to go find his eyes, sit next to him, and share the moment on purpose. It was walks where we noticed the way a tree leans into a fence over years, the way kids signing with their parents at the playground made my chest warm. It was the Saturday laundry routine that turned into a ritual where we folded shirts and planned our week by signing across the bed. It was me learning that facial expressions often carry grammar. So if I raise my eyebrows while signing, it's a question. And if I scrunch my nose, I might be telling you I don't like that restaurant we tried last time. I messed up often. Once at a restaurant, I panicked because the fire alarm went off and everyone looked around confused. For him, the bright flashing lights were the clearest signal, but alarms can be scary in any language. I touched his shoulder too hard. He flinched and I apologized right away. Then later we made a plan. If something urgent happens, 2 taps, steady, not sharp, and we stay together. Another time, I did that thing hearing people do without meaning to. I said, never mind, when I forgot what I was saying halfway through a sentence and felt embarrassed. His face fell only a fraction, and then it was fine because he's gracious. But I learned fast that never mind can feel like a closed door. So I retrained my mouth and my patience. He taught me as much as I learned in class. He taught me the sign for safe because we both liked using it when we got home at night and the lock clicked. He taught me to sign proud properly, thumb grazing my chest upward with a natural strength. He taught me that you can convey love with a sigh and a smile and silence as much as with words. He taught me that hard of hearing and deaf are identities people choose for themselves, not labels to stick on others. He told me about the time a teacher insisted he sit in the front row and he hating being singled out, and another teacher put him anywhere he wanted and then made sure the interpreter was always in his line of sight. That teacher became his favorite. He taught me culture, not just language. He said, if you learn my language and leave my culture behind, you will have half of me only. I said, I want all of you. In your words. I don't want you to think it was all lessons and profound moments. It was also grocery runs where he stacked fruit in the cart in a tidy rainbow, and I pretended not to notice because he knew I'd rearrange them anyway. It was Sunday morning pancakes where he spelled HELP while holding the whisk hostage. It was me signing orange wildly instead of grateful, because hands can tangle when you're in love and half-dressed and the toast pops up at the wrong time. We laughed in colors, which is what I call laughter that shows up in your cheeks and stays there all day. One autumn, we decided to drive along the coast to see the leaves turn where the shoreline curled. The road unfolded like ribbon. We stopped at a roadside stand where pumpkins gathered like cousins. He found one small and round, nicked on one side. He picked it up and signed perfect with a decisive nod. We stayed at a cabin someone's uncle owned with a porch swinging above the water. That night, a storm rolled in that sounded like the sky had lost something and was looking for it. The power flickered, then went out. The cabin was very dark, the kind of dark that reminds you how big the world is and how tiny your lamp really was. I reached for him because that's what we do when the lights go out in any kind of way. He reached back, sure as dawn. We sat on the floor with a blanket. I lit a candle. The flame made his hands into lanterns when he signed, "You okay?" I nodded and signed back. "You?" He nodded, then pulled my hand close and pressed my fingers to his chest, where his heartbeat was a steady drum. Had I ever listened like that before? To anyone? If I did, I don't remember. The storm pounded and he tapped my wrist to its rhythm and we laughed. Because sometimes the world is trying to be frightening and all it does is make you remember your bravery. We talked. If you can call what we did talking, but I think you can. We shared life. He told me in small signs and touches about being a child learning the difference between silence and peace. He told me how he felt when people said, "I'm so sorry" about his deafness. Like sympathy was an award no one needs. He told me he would not change himself, that he loved his world, that he can feel music in a friend's hand on a drum, the subway's hum, the way laughter shakes a table. I told him about my own differences, less visible, but there. A tendency to shut down when things got heavy, a habit of trying to please everyone. He tapped his fingers softly at my shoulder and signed, "Look at me." I did. He signed, "You are enough." I took that sentence into my pocket and kept it like a river stone. We didn't get engaged in a way that would trend, but it holds a whole neighborhood of memory for me. It was a Sunday in May, the sun doing that gentle thing it does when it's not trying too hard. Our city had a street fair every spring. Booths lined up with homemade soap and jars of honey, and one table where an older man carved tiny birds. A community group brought a small stage and an interpreter who signed stories from a deaf poet between sets by a local band. We stood in that little square of ordinary magic, and I knew this was the right place. I had asked Talia for help. She tucked herself into the crowd with her phone ready, tears already pending. The poet finished, and the band adjusted their amps. I stepped onto the edge of the open space and got Eli's attention with a soft wave. He looked up, curious. People in the circle quieted because proposals are universal. You can feel when one is happening. I signed to him. Slowly, carefully. Not just "I love you," which felt like "I know" after all this time, but the words we'd made for ourselves. I signed "home" and then pointed to my chest, then to his, then to the space between us. I signed "safe" and "proud" and "want." My hands shook, and I let them, because what else are they for if not telling the truth? Then I signed "marry me," both hands making the ring motion, and then the ceremonious kind of offering. A little awkward, a lot real. He stood still for a second like he'd stepped out of time. People around us held their breaths because some moments don't need help making silence. Then he stepped toward me with that smile I recognized from the very first day. He took my face in his hands and kissed me, and then signed "yes," like he was putting a period at the end of the most beautiful sentence I'd ever seen. Applause happened around us in sound and in hands waving in the air in the deaf way, and both kinds felt right. I slid the ring on his finger, a simple band that caught the sunlight and made tiny lights on his hand. He leaned his forehead against mine, and I could hear his breath. The ocean sounding, the fair going on around us, and somewhere nearby a song we didn't need to hear to know what it meant. We planned a wedding that summer that felt like us. We had a deaf interpreter at the ceremony and a hearing one too, so everyone's vows and speeches were words and signs and full of all the ways to say, "You are my person." We had 2 aisles converging into one, so our families walked toward each other. My mom signed "I love you" with both hands as if one wouldn't be enough. His father cried. My dad's speech was a sequence of short sentences that my father learned to sign, shaky and beautiful, and it moved me in ways I will carry to my last day. The cake tasted like lemon and old recipes. The playlist was more about rhythm and joy than lyrics. We made sure the floor thumped enough for anyone to feel it. Loved ones came up to us all evening and said, out loud or with their hands, that they felt seen. Love does that. It spills over. We did not wake the day after our wedding knowing exactly how to be husbands. We woke up the same as every day and then decided to be kind. That's all marriage is most days. Reminding yourself with breakfast and your eyebrows that you want to make the other person's job easier, not harder. We packed for a small trip to a house by a lake where the nights were the kind of quiet you can taste. We brought the doorbell and the vibrating alarm and a stack of books and a plan to do very little. We met neighbors who waved and asked questions with curiosity rather than assumption. An older couple down the road, both retired teachers, practiced signing "good morning" with us every day until they got it smooth. We helped them carry groceries. They brought us pie. The world, when you are gentle with it, often remembers to be gentle back. Moving through life with Eli has changed how I look at everything, even the things I thought I had already learned. I pay attention differently. I realize how many conversations in this world leave people out, and I find myself pulling chairs up and raising my hands to make room. I ask restaurants if their videos have captions. If they do not, I ask why not. At work, I started putting the agenda on a shared screen and making sure everyone can see my face when I speak. It helped all of us, not just the deaf volunteers. Imagine that. What helps one person often lifts the whole group. He changed my faith too, if by faith you mean the way you believe the world is stitched together. I used to think love was a feeling that showed up and then you held on to it as long as you could. Now I know it is a practice. Love is coming into the room, dialing yourself into presence and asking with your hands or your heart, "I am here. Are you?" Love is learning someone's world like it's a language because often it literally is. Love is signing sorry, not because you are obligated, but because you see the small rip in the daily fabric and you want to mend it before night. Love is a kitchen timer pulsing against your wrist and a laugh you can feel through a table and a gaze that says, I will wait while you finish spelling what hurts. Sometimes people ask me, gently or boldly if they forget to be gentle, isn't it hard? I smile because everything worthwhile is sometimes hard. Also because I think the question means, wouldn't it be easier with someone who hears the way you do? And I want to say, easier doesn't make your life bigger. Love does that. Yes, we do a little more planning. We make sure the video calls have good lighting. We sit so he can see the interpreter at a show. We make the world open its captions and its doors. But what I get in return is not measurable in convenience. I get eyes that do not look away. I get a home built from intention. I get a man who taught me that the quiet between words is full of meaning, and that I love you is sometimes a hand on your back at the end of a long day, sometimes a note slid under a mug. Be safe. Sometimes it is the literal Eiley handshape, pinky, index finger, and thumb extended, the way he flashes it at me when we lock the door and head out into the world, a lighthouse in his palm. One winter, after an early snow turned the city hush, we took a walk through the park where the trees held white hats and the path crunched. A kid on a sled zoomed past us shrieking joy, his dad trailing behind with his hat crooked. Eli signed the story of what would happen next with his hands. Dad would pretend to fall, the kid would laugh, they would go again. He was right, of course, because he is a good storyteller and the world loves to be predictable sometimes. He turned to me and signed, "This is a good life." My throat tightened, because there were years before this when I couldn't have imagined I would stand in snow next to a man who says that and feel it as a certainty. I signed back, "Yes, thank you." He shook his head, smiling. He signed, "Thank you." When we got home, he drew a little star in the foggy window with his finger and then wrote our initials next to it. And it felt like the kind of thing you find again years later and feel the softness of the day again. I have learned whole paragraphs in ASL now. I can tell him about a book and why I cried on page 2. I can argue a point and make a joke and call him out kindly when he leaves the cabinet doors open because apparently some people do that their whole lives. He taught me to play with speed and holders, the grammar that carries time and condition. He told me the story of his name sign, given to him by a childhood friend who adored him so much she literally made him into light. We made our own idioms. When we are both tired and cranky, we sign to each other a little sequence we invented that says, "Call a truce, peanut butter toast meditation, then try again." When one of us needs space, we sign a tiny circle, and it means, "I love you. I will be back in 15 minutes. Please do not follow me into the bathroom with 5 thoughts." Teaching moments continue to show up. At a family reunion, a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years spoke loudly and slowly to Eli and used a voice I use with toddlers when I'm being silly. I watched Eli's face soften into patience, his hands still. I stepped in and said, kindly but firmly, "You can speak in your normal voice. I'll interpret a bit. Or you can write. He's deaf, not a child." The cousin blushed, then smiled, and the moment shifted into something better. Later, Eli signed, "Thank you." And I signed back, "Always." Which we both knew meant, I'll stand with you even when it's awkward, especially then. Our biggest challenges have been the same as everyone's: schedules, money, tiredness that creeps in from the edges. And a few that are ours. Doctors' offices that forget to book interpreters. A theater that insists they only have one captioned performance a month. People who think it's okay to ask invasive questions about his hearing body like some kind of exhibit. We have learned to write emails that are both clear and fierce. We have learned that posting an interpreter request in advance often works better, and that showing up with courage changes more than one policy over time. We have learned the power of allies. Neighbors who call out theaters with us. Friends who sign even if they are imperfect. Family who keep showing up to learn more signs like kids learning a camp song. The smallest things still catch me. The way he tucks a note into my jacket pocket when I'm nervous about a presentation, and I find it at noon, reading his block letters that say, "Handsome, brave, proud of you." The way he leans his head against mine at the dentist when the drill sounds like a spaceship, and I remember I am not the only one who needs comfort. The way his hands move when he signs, "Forever," stretching time gently, like he can pull tomorrow closer and hold it safe. The way he translates things for me that I didn't know needed translation. The weight of a farewell, the humor in a facial expression across a room, the tiredness a person wears like a coat. He taught me to see the world's hands. We started volunteering together at the library for a Saturday morning story and signs event. It attracts families with deaf kids, with hearing kids, with kids who just like seeing stories told with hands and eyes and faces where everyone gets to feel the magic. I learned to sign bear, forest, adventure, and a dozen animal names very quickly because children are delightful critics if your bear is not big enough. Eli props the book open and reads the page in sign with such clarity that even adults' mouths drop open a little, watching how meaning can dance without a single sound. I introduce and interpret. We do the old stories and the new. The kids line up after to show us their names and their favorite signs, and some parents hug us because it means something to see your reality be the main stage and not the sideshow. After we get bagels and talk about how this, too, is a kind of marriage, being citizens together, sharing good things. Every so often, I catch myself forgetting he's deaf, which sounds like a strange thing to say, and maybe I shouldn't. But I mean it in the way you forget that your person is tall. You still get them the coat that fits their arms, but you do not make a list of attributes before you love them. His deafness is part of him like my laugh is part of me. It shapes him. It shapes us. It does not diminish a single thing. It expands everything. Deaf gain, they call it sometimes, the idea that being deaf brings richness, not loss. I see that every day. My ordinary is better now. My ordinary has hands. If I could go back to that first afternoon and sit by myself as I fumbled with a cup and a smile, I'd tell that man, hey, don't be scared of doing it wrong. Be scared of leaving before you've tried. I'd tell him to let his hands be the ones that learn to talk. I'd tell him that the sound of love will change for him until he doesn't measure it with ears anymore. He will listen with shoulders, with breath, with the way a hand opens when it's telling you the entire history of a morning. I didn't know Eli was deaf when I first saw him. I didn't know that deaf meant more than a simple lack of hearing, that it meant a culture and a community growing like a forest in a clearing I hadn't walked into yet. I didn't know that my life was about to gain a language that would make me a better friend, son, neighbor, and man. He taught me love in ASL, not just how to say love, but how to practice it. He taught me that romance is a habit as well as a feeling, that it's 1,000 small translations and a decision each day to try in someone else's native language. We still have Thursdays. Even though we are married and share a closet and a calendar and favorite cereal, we keep Thursday evening like a small holiday. Sometimes it's that same old cafe, the doorbell chiming and the sight of him in that chair making me feel 20 every time. Sometimes it's a bench by the river where the lights puddle in the water and ducks argue about politics. Sometimes it's our couch, a storm outside, a candle flickering our hands into illustrations. Every Thursday, we sit down, turn our faces toward each other and ask, with hands the world can watch and hearts only we can feel, here? And the other answers, here. He still signs home like he did that second week, fingertips resting against his cheek, and my chest still squeezes in that way that isn't pain. We still sign safe when we lock the door and thank you when we hand each other a cup of tea, and proud when one of us does something brave like calling a senator or learning a new recipe that terrifies the kitchen. We still flash the ILY sign sometimes across a crowded room, a tiny lighthouse blinking in plain air for only one person to see. We still remind each other that never mind is okay only if it's truly never mind and not I'm tired of including you. On nights when the city is tired and the buses sigh louder than usual, I lean my head against his shoulder and watch his hands move even when he isn't signing, how they talk to the world in their own quiet way, how they rest when they're happy, how they make everything look like a song I didn't know I already loved. I think about the boy I was, the man I am, the man I will be, God willing, in many years. And I think about all the things I may forget as time takes its tax from my body and memory. I hope I never forget this. The weight of his hand on my back as we cross a street, the way his eyes meet mine before we say anything important, the shape my hands make when they tell him he is my home. And I hope I keep learning, because that is a promise I can sign strong even when my voice is tired. I didn't know he was deaf that day in the cafe. I know now. I know what it means and what it does not. It does not mean silence. It means a different music. It does not mean absence. It means an abundance of other senses. It does not mean something is broken. It means we build together with eyes and kindness and the gentle bravery of showing up exactly as we are. He taught me to listen with my eyes. He taught me to speak with my hands. He taught me that love is not a secret you whisper. It is a language you practice in the open so everyone who needs it can learn it too. And on Thursdays, in the cafe that started it all, he still reaches across the small table, taps my wrist twice, and signs a question that still makes my heart answer before my hands do. Are you here? I sign back, I am here, and I always will be.